So now all that's set, and I'm so excited to introduce Ang Roell, who is our webinar presenter today. And Ang owns two awesome businesses, among many other activities. One, They Keep Bees, is a femme-run apiary co-located in Western Massachusetts and South Florida. And they raise queen bees and produce honeycomb. Ang also runs Ang Roell Consulting, where they're committed to helping clients make the changes necessary to shift organizational culture and practice away from a model of dominant power towards a model of cooperative power, all inspired by ecological principles. And they're currently working on a book titled Radicalize the Hive, and it's out for preview in February of this year and available widely in April. So thank you again, Ang, and please take it away.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Maida, for having me and for being willing to engage in some of this work. So what you're seeing right now is my screen. I'm going to have to sort of move a little mini box around so that you can see the slides as we go through. So bear with me as we do that. I wanted to start this first just as a reminder, as you're coming into the room, if you could mute yourself by hovering over the little microphone in the lower left corner of your Zoom box. That will help cut down on feedback, on us hearing whatever you're doing in your space, and will make the webinar accessible and clear for everyone that's participating. So thanks for muting yourself when you come into the room. So I wanted to start our gathering on my end with a land recognition, and a land recognition is an opportunity for me to acknowledge the land, the unceded indigenous land that I am on. And I do this because for all of us, I think it's important to understand our history. If we cannot understand our history and build a way out of the current conditions that we're living in, without blame to those who are impacted, it's going to be hard for us to shift power and shift systems, both social, political. So I acknowledge that I and the honeybees that I work with live on the unceded land of Pecumtuck, Nipmuc, and Wabanaki Confederacy. And also that I keep bees in the land that is the unceded territory of the Seminole people in what is now South Florida. And also just acknowledging that while we have these amazing—
a lot to learn.
While we have these amazing resources like this land recognition map, the reality is that indigenous cultures were migratory. And so even just doing a land recognition brings up the complexity of how I, as a white person, am continuing to hold this concept of land ownership. So it's something that I do, and it's something that I also think that we all need to continue unpacking, and it's not just a singular action. Okay, so I'm gonna just do a little bit of a broader scope of who I am. Thank you to Maida.
All right, I'm joining this webinar that I'm late for right now, and so I'm gonna use the audio on my computer. Is that okay?
Hey, if you could just mute yourself as you're coming in, that'll really help us all be able to hear the presenter. Thank you so much. Okay, so my name is Ang Roell. As Maida said, I run these two enterprises. One is called They Keep Bees, where I work with honeybees to raise climate resilient queen bees and produce comb honey. And then the next is an organizational consulting practice where I work with orgs to develop frameworks for making change internally and for having impact externally as groups. A lot of this work is pulled from my work with honeybees and noticing how these social superorganisms are building collaboration and applying that in a professional realm and to humans, which is complicated, and we'll talk a little about that. So to start out, I just want to mention that when I teach through a few different strategies. I model, which is some of what I've already been doing for you. I define terms and expectations and purpose. So defining purpose is a really crucial tool in getting to a successful collaboration. If people don't understand what they're doing collaboratively or collectively, or what the expectations of them are, it's going to be very difficult for them to collaborate and to feel like they're sharing power and sharing in a project collaboratively. So keeping that in mind, I want to define our purpose. And then I like to also share stories, because I think stories are a really great way for us to comprehend and to address multiple learners. And I will also be providing strategies. So those are the different ways that I'm going to frame this work for you today in the next little bit of time that we have. So the purpose of our meeting today is to build an understanding of the root cause of the plight of the honeybee, to learn about how honeybees effectively collaborate, to explore how to be more effective collaborators by setting terms, sharing power, and building collective understanding while being compassionate and forgiving of ourselves. And we'll have an opportunity to discuss how we will apply this in our work and in the conference space. Okay, so we're gonna get started with root cause, and I'm gonna tie humanity and honeybees together a little bit here for you so that we can start building relevance of what it is we're talking about. So the picture on the top of this slide of this bucolic Western Massachusetts apiary with a rainbow raining down upon it is, I think, what a lot of people think about when they think about honeybees. They think about backyard beekeepers or typically older folks who are working and tolling in their backyards, right? And then we have the lower image, which is an image of the reality of honeybee keeping. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of context for what that reality is. So over the past 10 years, some of you may have heard, honeybees have been losing their habitats. They have been exposed to a number of toxic pesticides. There are a lot of new viruses that honeybees are facing, and the changing climate is impacting our pollinators. So not just honeybees, but also native pollinators who are indigenous to the United States, as well as bats and butterflies and other secondary pollinator insects. So all of this, the coalescence of all of these issues is a problem for honeybees and for humans because bees are a keystone species, which means we rely on them for our basic survival. And that essentially means that they are pollinating 1 in 4 bites of the food that we eat. And if they cease to exist, we wouldn't have anyone to pollinate things like apples, oranges, almonds, avocados, cranberries, the list goes on and on. This issue a decade ago was distilled down into something called colony collapse disorder, or CCD, and that was blamed for widespread honeybee die-off. But in reality, what was actually going on is that honeybees were acting as the canary in the coal mine. They're giving us a warning about the impact of farming at an industrial scale. And this image on the bottom of my slide is what farming on an industrial scale looks like for honeybees. It looks like honeybees on pallets. These pallets get put on the backs of 16-wheelers. Those 16-wheelers get moved to monocrop agriculture, almonds, avocados, apples, all over the United States. 1.7 million hive boxes are transported out to California for the almond bloom, which is actually happening right now as we have this webinar. And that means millions of beekeepers are participating in this. It's close to 85% of all of the honeybee hives in the United States. And in addition to the millions of bees and the millions of beekeepers, we also have hundreds of millions of pounds of pesticides being used in almond pollination. So it's this really clear example for me of how we are having to face the fact that as humans, we are exploiting and extracting from the environment, and it's having these catastrophic impacts on our environment, on our planet, on honeybees, and on people. This recent quote that I saw from a summit in Barcelona said that our current economic model is based on endless growth, consumption, and a permanent race for profit. And this economic system threatens the ecological balance of our planet and has multiplied inequities. So it's multiplied inequities within humanity, but also in how we face and collaborate with the environment and the ecological world around us. So that's sort of like where we are starting. It's it's a big, heavy problem. So what do we do about this? I love this Angela Davis quote. It clearly defines for us that we have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and we have to do it all of the time. So this work is iterative. It is us engaging in shifting systems and making change and addressing inequities in all of the models or modes of our lives, and doing that consistently. So honeybees are social superorganisms, external of the industry that humans have placed them in, and the fact that we're using them as a tool for pollination. They're actually incredible collaborators that we can be looking to for lessons on how to be more effective collaborators and build collectives. They build consensus. They know how to organize around a specific purpose. They share power. They work in collectives. And they are consistently and constantly communicating. So not just through dance and scent, which are listed here, but through vibration, through touch. And I think that one of the first lessons I always like to pose is this idea that constant communication and iterative communication is really important for successful collaboration. And that communication has to be accessible to your collective. So if it's just in Google Drive, for example, but no one is using Google Drive in the group you're trying to collaborate with, then it's going to be really hard to get the information you're trying to share to them. So you have to think outside the box of what it looks like to share information with people who have all different learning styles. And the best way to figure that out is to ask them. Okay. So I want to frame consensus building and sharing power in the context of something called a swarm. Honeybees collectively embrace change, and the most profound example of this is a swarm. And before I talk about the swarm, what I want to talk about is that swarming is an act of building and acting upon the resources that exist inside of a hive. So it's expansion, it's an opportunity to reproduce. And before I talk about that, I think it's also really important for me to talk about the fact that honeybees ebb and they flow. So they expand and they contract. And the contraction is as important as the expansion. I think as humans, we are often so hyper-focused, as I said in my other slide, on this expansion, on the search for profit and the achievement of success, that we don't value the necessity of contraction, of rest, of people needing to pull out of collaborations and recover or take time for thoughtful reflection before coming back in. And so I'm going to talk about swarms, and I also want to hold space for the reality that this is reproduction and expansion, and at the same time, there's moments of contraction, and we'll touch upon why those are important more a little bit later. So swarms. This is a swarm of bees, and a swarm of bees in a balanced ecosystem happens typically in the springtime. So it doesn't matter where you are in the country or the world, this is happening in the spring. It's happening because there's an abundance of nectar and pollen in the ecosystem around those honeybees. The hive becomes very full of what is called worker bees. And workers are the collective of a hive. So we want to think about, I think a lot of times we hear honeybee hive, we think of a queen bee, we think this is a monarchy. This is actually a collective or a cooperative democracy where decisions are made by the workers that you're seeing on your screen right now. So as the hive gets fuller and fuller and fuller and fuller, these workers are expanding, the number of workers is increasing because more are hatching, and the hive gets overflowed with food. And what happens is they essentially just run out of space, and they decide to turn one hive into two. And to do that, they need to raise a new queen. So they feed a tiny larva a special diet of royal jelly and pollen. And that tiny larva turns into a queen. She spins a cocoon inside of the hive. And right before she is about to emerge from that cocoon, half of the bees leave, and they take with them the old queen. So what you're seeing in this image is half of the bees from a hive, the worker bees, plus the old queen. And what they leave behind is a hive that has a newly emerged queen, a lot of young bees, and plenty of nectar and pollen, which is their food, their resource that they need to grow back up. So at this point of expansion that this hive is experiencing, they're also leaving behind an incredibly resource-rich opportunity to create a second hive. And that hive will have the opportunity to grow from where it is right now. So another sort of inlaid lesson of this is that resource sharing is a really important part of collaboration and of expansion that builds successful collaboration. So we have this swarm. It's hanging as it is in this image from the branch of a tree. It can hang from a shrub. Sometimes they land on the floor, the ground. That's not really relevant. What is relevant is what's happening inside. So inside of this cluster of bees that you're seeing is a single queen. And these bees begin to travel out. They're keeping that queen protected and safe, balling up around her. And one by one, they begin to travel out. And they're looking for new locations to call home. When they find a new location that meets their needs, it's like high enough off the ground, it is got good access to water and other resources, they come back to their collective and they begin to dance out the location of this new spot. And one by one, the bees in this cluster, every single one of them will go and check out that new location, and they will see if they agree that it's a good spot. As they return to this swarm, they'll begin to dance out the details of each location with the intention of voting or creating a consensus. So they agree, if I agree with you that your location is a good spot, I will begin to dance just like you. And then other bees will gather our message, hear what we're saying, and they'll go check out the spot. And if they agree, they'll come back and they'll begin to dance. So what I want to model for you in this is that there is autonomy in the decision making. So it's not that you're forcing me to dance the way that you're dancing, but that you're sharing information with me and I'm checking it out for myself. And I feel like that information is valid and useful for me. And so I take up your cause or your dance. And that is how bees build consensus. There's an incredible bee researcher, his name is Tom Seeley, and he says that bees achieve their collective wisdom by organizing themselves in such a way that even though each individual has limited information and knowledge, the group as a whole can make a first-rate collective decision. And Tom Seeley has done a lot of swarm studies and found that every single time that a hive swarms, if left to its own devices, it will always choose the best possible location. He's got an incredible book called Honeybee Democracy that lays out all of this research that I highly encourage you to engage with if this is something that's really sparking joy in you at this moment. So that is the process of collective consensus building that bees engage with when they're swarming. And some of you may be thinking, yeah, but we're not bees. And I agree with you, we're not bees. Our collaboration and our consensus building is much more complicated. We're not as agile as they are in groups. And it's harder for us to build collective consensus. One of the challenges that we face as humans is that charismatic leadership. And this is the idea that we follow those that have the most charisma, that have the most influence, that have the most charm, that have the most social power or capital, right? And because we have this inkling to follow charismatic leaders, we have to do the work of deconstructing hierarchies and building intentional awareness about the fact that this is one of our social defaults. And in order to do this, we need to be more intentional in our work of sharing power, building trust, and checking our privileges and our powers. If anyone is sitting here thinking that you are more like bees, I invite you to reflect on this question that I've been working with. How often do you use personal or professional status to establish power during social interactions? This can look like asking somebody what they do for work when you first meet them. This can look like using influence to get into a workshop or using organizational pull to get a funder, right? So we are constantly conditioned to establish power during social interactions because of this issue of charismatic leadership. So what do? I think the first thing that we have to do is reflect upon visible and invisible social identities. So the image that you see here is a collection of people that came together on my farm in 2019. And we started building something that we called Queer and Trans Bee Day. So this was a group of folks who fall under the queer and trans identity, so LGBTQIA plus. And we started these gatherings by very slowly building a group of, very slowly building a group of folks who were interested in facilitating dialogue at these gatherings. And the very first thing that we did is establish an understanding of what our visible and invisible social identities were. We talked about race, ethnicity, class, gender, sexuality, ability. We named where we hold power and privilege. So we named where we hold these identities that would be considered oppressor identities, or places where we hold power. And we named identities where we experience oppression, and we held the space for both of those to exist simultaneously. And the reason that we do this is because you can't share power if you don't know you have it. If you feel like you don't have the capacity to share or leverage your privilege or power, then it's not going to be possible for you to do that. The other reason we do this is because diverse perspectives and identities are important. We all know this. I'm thinking that we're in a shared or like-minded group in this space of believing that diversity, equity, and inclusion need to be prioritized in our work. But at the same time, diverse perspectives and identities only become powerful when we make space for them to be heard, to be valued, and to be integral to the collective. So they only become powerful when we really do make space for them to be in leadership positions. They only become powerful when we're giving up power to diverse perspectives and we're holding space to really intentionally share that power and bring them in. Because we're not bees, another thing that we did in this group is make space for humanity, which meant making space for differences, for traumas, for life events, and for the reality that as a collective, there would be moments where we couldn't all show up in the same space and we could still move forward and share information with the folks that weren't able to be present with us. And that sometimes we needed to pivot or shift to be present in the same place by making room for space and time. What am I talking about when I say that? I mean that that successful collaboration takes time, and sometimes you have to push an event back or push a goal or a deliverable back because you need to focus on developing successful collaborations with the people that you're working with. If you're trying to push something forward and you take the lead to push it forward, you could be taking a risk that you're upsetting the power dynamic. And so in this group, we were really mindful of doing that, of keeping an open dialogue, of figuring out what are the ways that each of us prefer to communicate so that we can effectively communicate with each other, so that when an issue comes up, we can figure out as a collective what the best action for that is. So when we build high trust groups like this, we can be very coherent and effective. Bees trust innately, it's part of their biology, but we have to build trust as humans. We don't have that luxury. When we build that trust, we can be agile, we can be adaptive, and we can intentionally share power as a group. Reminder again that bees have no charismatic leaders. So to mimic that concept, we have to minimize hierarchy. So what are the ways, small or large, that you can minimize hierarchy in the work that you do with your organization? What are the ways that you can challenge the leadership of your organization to start minimizing hierarchy? I think that the first step in that is to start with communication and communication strategies that create a sort of flatness of our power structures. So that we can all be on the same page about it, understanding transparently how the hierarchies work and how we're trying to disrupt them. So I came up with this list for our work today of ways that we can put this into action in our work, or put this into action in thinking about the summit that is coming up that Maida will talk about in a moment. I think the first thing to do is to reflect or to develop an understanding of your personal or organizational identities, privileges, power, and resources. There is a really excellent resource, I didn't include it in the links, but it's called the 8 Forms of Capital. And it breaks down the different ways that we hold resource or power. And I think it's a really great exercise to engage with, or even just making a brainstorm list of all the ways that your organization holds power, all of the ways that your organization holds resources, what privileges they have, what collaborations they have, and how those can be used to disrupt your typical power dynamic, right? So a lot of times we use those tools as strategies for how to move our organization forward. And I'm inviting you to turn that on your head. Great if you have this already, but what does it look like for you to use it as a way of building successful collaborations? Next, take time to build intentional collaborations that are rooted in trust and transparency. So strong relationships take time, and we all know this. But as an organization, it can be really challenging to internalize that because, of course, we're pressed up against the issue of trying to get things done under a deadline. But commit to knowing that if you want to build successful collaborations, it's going to take time. And so if you're trying to do something in 6 months, maybe if you want to do it collaboratively, it's going to take a year. And I think that the more honest we can be about timelines, the more realistically we can set goals. Also, a lot of us have this messaging right now that there's not enough time. And I just want to remind all of you in this webinar that we create and construct time. We invented time as a society. And so we can disrupt time, and we can shift time, and we as organizations can actively change the way that we set goals to be more realistic to what we know the actual timelines are. Listen to diverse perspectives. I think I touched on this already, but if you are trying to collaborate across difference, you really need to be intentional about listening to your collaborators, what their needs are, what the resources they need are, and figure out where you can be sharing resource, power, and privilege with your collaborators. And also being able to name your own needs. And so again, that exercise of really understanding what they are, what your power sources are, what your privileges are, what your resources are, and also where you may be holding pains or traumas or things that you need to unpack personally or as a group dynamic. Share power and collaborate by sharing information, responsibilities, and leadership. So we live in a digital age. It is easy to share information, to have transparency about responsibilities and about leadership. Find the tool, whether it is Slack or Google Drive or WhatsApp or a group text message that is going to work for your team to share information, responsibilities, and leadership so that your network can continue to grow and successfully share all 3 of these things. Create transparency by sharing information in accessible ways. Again, this is about finding the right tools and also making sure that the information goes out not just to your network, but to networks you're trying to collaborate with. And make room for humanity. And I touched on this already, but this is the idea that it is vitally important to make space for issues in people's lives, for challenges that may come up, and to be compassionate towards that, and not have the sort of capitalist extractive framework that people are only there to deliver to your need or your organization's need. Relationships are about give and take and ebb and flow, and we're not always going to be in flow. It's as important that we make space for each other to contract when necessary. All right, so I already said this, but when we build high trust groups, it makes it much easier for us to be agile and adaptive as things are rapidly changing. Okay, and the last thing that I want to say about strategies is that this work is iterative, like most work that we do in the world. So that means that we have to practice these tools, these strategies, the things that we take from inspiration from the honeybee hive, from the ecological world. We have to practice remembering what it was like to live in a space where there was ebb and flow. We have to practice. Making the space to extract ourselves from a system of constant expansion that's not working. And what that means is, as we practice, we're hopefully going to get better and grow and change. And we have to, in that same space, be forgiving of ourselves, make room for our own humanity, our own mistakes, and our own transformation. And just to know that we're not going to get everything right all the time, and that's okay, and that's not realistic. And to embrace that in our collaborations that are professional and personal. So finding inspiration and hope, I just wanted to shout out a couple of folks who are doing really powerful work. This image is of a queen bee. Queens can lay over 2,000 eggs a day. Every single one of those eggs has the potential or the hope of growing into an adult bee and being able to forage for nectar and pollen. So with that in mind, I want to give you some examples of small-scale groups that are building change. And these are in the food system and also in the rural landscape in which I live. So Soul Fire Farm, I think, has an incredibly rich website of resources available for power sharing and shifting racism in the food system. Rock Steady Farm is a queer-led farm where they are a cooperative, and they're also very intentional about building cooperatives as a model. There's an organization called Out in the Open Vermont. They were one of the collaborators for our queer and trans bee camp last year, but they're also really intentionally building relationships across difference in a rural landscape, and really intentionally welcoming, well, they center queer and trans identity, very intentionally welcoming the cross collaboration and modeling what it looks like to be resilient in a rural environment. And then one more person that I love and respect in the beekeeping world who does a lot of intentional collaboration is a woman named Melanie Kirby, who is currently a National Geographic Fellow in Spain, where she's working on a map of small-scale beekeepers who are working to breed diverse genetic stock. And so she's really taken her expertise and her skills and is applying it to creating international collaboration. So Tanya is going to link to all of these incredible projects so that you can grab some inspiration from them. And we are going to use this time now as an opportunity to break out into small groups and to practice a little bit of thinking about what collaboration could look like. So we have some case studies. We're going to do one case study in small groups or breakout groups. And then we are going to do a second case study as a large group dialogue together. So because we're going to separate out and we're going to have an opportunity to share space and hear each other's voices, we wanted to remind you of some group agreements. And group agreements are a really incredible way of setting the tone and the expectations of a space. And these are group agreements adapted from Queer and Trans Bee Day. So identity is our first one. We're going to respect everyone's identity, experience, and background, including pronouns and names. And in the small groups, if you can say your name and if you would like to share your pronouns when you speak, just so people know who you are and what you'd like to be called, that'll help facilitate that. When we are sharing, be aware of your prejudice and privilege. Allow space for all voices, which means use I statements, speak from your own experience. And this is a new practice that I'm trying out in my facilitated group, so I invite you to try it in your small group as well. If you're white, able-bodied, cisgender, or hold other privileges you're aware of, practice taking one breath for every privilege you hold before you speak in the small groups. And we're trying this exercise out as a way of making room for voices that don't often get heard first in our current social structures. When possible, assume best intentions. This is a learning space, but also call in challenging behaviors and see if you could talk about them as an integral to the dialogue when possible. Consent, so respect everyone's emotional boundaries. If somebody says they don't wish to talk about something, please respect that. And then listening. I think the best way to understand is by asking. So if you don't understand what someone said, ask them to clarify, ask them an open-ended question that will get them to clarify. Think about how you can actively be in that listening space. Embrace ragged or incomplete thoughts and silence if somebody's needing a moment to think. And then because we'll have moderators in each of these groups, a reminder of the moderator engagement strategies. Moderators are invited to use open-ended questions, affirmations, reflective listening, which is what I heard you say is X, Y, and Z. Did I get that right? And summaries. So as you're wrapping up, if you could summarize what you talked about in the group, that would be great. My expectation is when we introduce these case studies and you go into the group to chat, that you're not coming out with 7 radical solutions, but just really that you have an opportunity to connect and think about this material a little bit more. It's okay to not come to a solution in these groups. Okay, so at this slide, I'm going to turn it back over to Maida, who is going to talk through the first case study.
Great. Thank you so much, Ange.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I was taking notes as you were talking. Great. So I thought I'd offer up the campus farm where I work as a case study to practice communication strategies using principles of the Hive. And that place is Book and Plow Farm. And Book and Plow Farm is in its 8th growing season at Amherst College in Amherst, Massachusetts. And it is a project that was started largely because of student interest, initiative, and advocacy. So a group of students got the farm going in 2012 and made it possible for people to start the farm. And now we are a staff of 3 running this operation and work with over 45 students every year. And we grow a lot of food. And so looking at our mission statement, I would say that building healthy soil and growing vegetables with students is the primary and very effortful function of the farm, but it's only one part of the farm's mission. So if you don't mind looking at the next slide. We have a pretty extensive mission of things we want to accomplish with the students we're working with and expanding that out into staff, faculty, and the broader Amherst community. So we grow veggies, we try to farm with responsibility towards the land, we employ students and teach them about farming, and we also want to be a hub or a resource for hosting events, giving guest lectures at classes and offering workshops and social events on the farm. And so the case study, the question I propose is, how can we develop these meaningful events that meet students' needs and attract a broad range of participants?
Awesome. I think I wanted to jump in here, right?
Great. Yeah.
So I wanted to jump in here and just sort of offer a few quandaries. So we have this idea that we want to develop meaningful events that meet student needs. So the students are our focal point here, and then attract a broad range of participants. So what are the ways that Book and Plow can begin to figure out what a meaningful event for students is? And think about what the connections that the network currently has are, so that you can begin attracting a broad range of participants. And just to clarify, are you thinking of broad range as people within the Amherst College community, or also within sort of the larger regional or town-wide community, like pulling in from the Pioneer Valley, say?
Yeah, we are always happy when, it may depend on the nature of the event, where some things are more appropriate just to offer to students on campus. But on the farm, we really like to encourage neighbors and people from town to come to a medicinal herb walk or a social event. So it can be outside of campus. But the students, as this is a college, the students, it's the students' needs that we want to meet primarily. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And so just holding that in our mind, that it's the students first and then added benefit of expanding into the broader network of the region. Great, so I think, we're gonna go over what's working and not working for you. So what are you wanting to change? And then understanding what the benefits that the farm has right now. So you wanna take that?
Yeah. Great, yeah, this felt like maybe an applicable quandary even beyond a campus farm specifically. We want to host events, but there's a very full program calendar in addition to students' full academic schedules. And then we've hosted events in the past, but it's still part of like a relatively new and evolving identity of the farm. People don't see us primarily as an event space. We grow vegetables first. And then the other campus departments with whom we might collaborate also have their own priorities. So those are some of the challenges I've noticed when thinking about this as a case study. And then what's working for us is that we have heard students express, a broader range of students express a desire for wellness activities and outdoor-based activities that we think would be a good fit for the farm. And we do have resources, both physical space and access to the funding in our budget for events, which is finite, but present. Yeah. And so I think what will happen next is I might let you, I'll do it. So I think what we're going to hope to do is break out into these little breakout rooms. I know we're running up close to the 3 p.m. hour, but if you're able to stay and practice some of Andrew's communication strategies and consider an approach to supporting this case study and taking any lessons you learn, hopefully you can apply them to your own institutions as well, or organizations.
Hey y'all, so we are, I think many of us are back and some of us will probably just be trickling in. So I'm gonna minimize that. I think that our intention was to wrap up at 3 o'clock. So to be respectful of people's time, I don't know that we'll have a decompression as a large group or get the opportunity to do our second case study. But I do know that it was important to talk about the upcoming Campus Farmers Summit. That maybe, Hannah, I see that you are here from FINE. Did you want to say a quick thing about the Campus Farmers Summit? Because I don't see Maida in our group quite yet.
I'm here.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you all for being part of the conversation. And our hope was to just make sure that those of you who knew about it would be, we'd love to see you at the Campus Farmer Summit on February 22nd. We'll have we hope to have over 100 people gathering and doing workshops looking at how farms nourish students and how farms themselves need nourishment from the campuses they're embedded in. And one thing we will be referring to there is some of the lessons learned from you and via you from the Hive about ways to consider recognizing our privilege and connecting at a different way, working collaboratively together. And so our thought was we could look at, it just felt really like an appropriate lead-in to have that conversation about how we connect before we all connect in February. And so that's, I think, the main gist.
Yeah, and just thinking about those connections and how we sustain engagement beyond the conference as well. So, and Maida, am I correct in assuming we're going to wrap up for 3, right? So we're not going to deconstruct this.
Yeah, I think that works, if
Great.
that's okay, yeah.
Yes, that is great. I am going to put up this slide about the feedback. Do you want to say something about that?
I think you can go for it. Thanks.
All right, cool. So on this slide, it's just an indication that we'd love your feedback. There's a webinar survey, SurveyMonkey here. I believe Tanya from Fine is going to link this in the chat as well, so you can just copy and paste it from there. And if you want to get in touch with me, this is my contact info. I have 2 email addresses. They're all going to the same place. info@angelaroell.com or info@theykeepbees.com. Like I said, I am going to be releasing a free book this coming April about this work and diving a little bit deeper into both the history and the work itself. And so if you wanted access to that, you can email me and I'll get you on the list for when that goes out. And thank you so much. Oh, and you can follow me on the social media handles that I think Tanya put in the chat, but I'm on Instagram @theykeepbees and on Facebook as well, where I'll also be talking more about this work as it unfolds and ways for people to engage with it. So thank you so much for joining us. I hope that this was useful and productive for you and that you have a beautiful, beautiful day, because where I am, the sun is shining and I'm going to get out there and enjoy it.
Thank you all very much for coming in. And thank you, Ange, for presenting. We're lucky to have gotten to listen to that.
Thank you. This was awesome.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here. Take good care.
Thank you.
Well, they're on a different time zone than we are.